My name is Lisette Sutherland, and I run a company called Collaboration Superpowers. We help companies work together remotely. I'm also the remote office manager for Jürgen Appelow's Management 3.0 Happy Melly team, part-time. And before we start, since this is an Agile conference, I always get asked this, so I'll say I am in no way related to Jeff Sutherland. It's a total coincidence. I lived in Los Angeles about 10 years ago, and people always asked if I was related to Kiefer or Donald. And I was like, no, I would not be working in this cafe if I were related to Kiefer or Donald Sutherland. So it's just me, Lisette. And today we'll talk about how to be a high-performing distributed Agile team, and I'm hoping to give you simple tips and tricks for how to work online as if you're in the office together. And I'm going to show a lot of tools, and some of them will be very far out, but I'm happy after seeing the opening keynote this morning that my tools will not be the most far out things that you'll have seen today. So for one of the first times in a long time, I won't be the weirdest one on the stage. So I am experimenting this time. I'm going to use Slido to do a couple of polls while we do the presentation, just to make it a little bit interactive. So you can go to slido.com, and there's an event code, but you don't have to do it now. We'll get to it when we get to the poll, just to let you know that you can take out your phones and participate. So I'm assuming that many of you are Agile practitioners and that you have to work with distributed teams. And I know that I'm very enthusiastic about remote working, but I'm not here to argue, is remote work better or remote teams better or worse? I'm more interested in the question of, if we have to work remote, then what do we do? So that's what I'm hoping to talk about today, because in every situation, it just depends on the team. Some teams need to be co-located, and some teams need to be remote. It just depends. So I know that you've heard in the Agile Manifesto back in 2001 that in order to be Agile, we have to be face-to-face. But so much has happened since then that I'm going to argue, is it okay if we're e-face to e-face? So that's what I want to show today. And I know that in the past, that remote communication has been pretty bad. I mean, I think a lot of us remember the spider phones. You know, you're leaning over like, hey, Bob, it's Lisette. Can you hear me? Yeah, so we'll talk about that in a second. And I can say, let's be honest, some things are still bad. And I'm talking about Skype for Business in particular. So I'm on a mission. It's so bad. And I know Skype knows it's bad because they're phasing it out, and the new Microsoft Teams has something different. But so many teams are still plagued with Skype for Business that I still like to mention it. So this brings us to our first poll, because I'm really curious how many people out there are still using spider phones, and how many people actually love Skype for Business or not. So if you want to go to the first poll, I'll show the results on the stage. And for the younger people in the audience, they're like, what's a spider phone? And just consider yourselves lucky. So I'll go to the poll, and we'll see what the results look like. I can show it in real time. Okay. So I'll just wait a minute for the results to come in. There's always one person in the audience who loves Skype for Business. It's probably a Skype person. No, it's okay. I hope to show you some good alternatives. Okay, so sad to see how many people are still having to use Skype for Business, but luckily it's being phased out, and there's better tools on the market. And also 25% of people are using a spider phone. So hopefully we'll come up with something a little bit better during this presentation. So I'll go back, find my presentation again. So really, a lot has happened, especially in the last 5 years. And I think it's time for companies to take another look. And I want to give you just sort of a view of what's happening out there and what remote teams are using. But first, before we go into the how, I want to just give you some proof and some hope that it is possible. So I've been doing a podcast since 2014 where I'm interviewing remote teams. And so I'm going to just tell you a couple of the stories today. Not all of them, of course, then we'd be here all day. But the first one, and one of my favorite one, is from a team called R-Loop. And a few years ago, SpaceX had a competition to see who could build the Hyperloop, which is what you're seeing here on the screen. It's a super fast transportation system that can take a commute of 7 hours and squeeze it into about 30 minutes. You're essentially being shot through a vacuum tube. And I don't want to be the beta user, for this product, but it does seem pretty cool if it is possible. And one of the guys, or one guy named Tom, posted in a subforum of Reddit that he was interested in joining this competition, as was there anybody else interested in joining him. And 1 year later, with a team of over 400 remote volunteers, I should say, not even employees, they came in finalists in the competition and are still working on it today. So I find that a pretty incredible story, that 400 random people from all over the world can get together and build something as complicated and cool as this. And a story a little bit closer to home and a little less far out. This is Jeffrey Hesse. He's an Agile coach at a company called Sonatype. He has a team of about 30 people who are all distributed, and he decided that he was going to run an experiment. So he's also a climber, and he thought, okay, I'm going to go to Argentina for 1 month and see if I can still be productive while I'm on the road and climbing, and see if his team would notice that he's on the road. So it was sort of a two-part experiment. And he said that it was really lucky that he had tech skills, because he had to put some crazy systems together in order to get the Wi-Fi to work and get systems connect. And Argentina is not known for the fastest Wi-Fi in the world. So he said it was a real struggle. But at the end of the 30 days, he was able to do it, and his team didn't know that he'd been on the road. So it is possible, even as an Agile coach, to work remotely. If you want to hear the rest of the stories, all the podcasts and videos are for free on the website. And then I just published a book 2 months ago called Work Together Anywhere, and that is available paperback and Kindle on Amazon. So you can find all the stories and all the tips there. And what I've learned from doing all these interviews is, unfortunately, there's no one right way. I would have loved to have discovered the silver bullet and made lots of money on it, but it turns out that working remotely together successfully is a series of small things, nothing that's rocket science, thankfully, small things that you have to massage into place, experiment, and see what works for your team. And what works for one team doesn't always work for the other team. So it just really depends. So that's sort of the good news and the bad news. But it does come down to sort of three main factors. And it means we have to make communicating with each other easy, we have to define what normal behavior is on our team, and we have to create presence or work out loud and make our work observable to our team members. So those are the key main points of how to do it successfully. And I want to start with how to make communicating easy. Because one of my favorite quotes is, people think they want to be co-located, but what we really want is high bandwidth communication. We want to be able to talk to our remote colleagues as if they're standing next to us. And I always make the Star Trek analogy, and was so happy to see another Star Trek analogy this morning, but this time with the communicators. You know, from anywhere on the ship, Picard to Riker, you know, the captain can reach anybody on the ship with a touch of a button. And I think that with remote working, we can do this too now. We don't have to have the silly spider phones, and we don't have to spend 15 minutes setting up the tech. It can be a push-to-talk scenario. And the way we do that is we have to start with a good internet connection. And it should go without saying, but in so many parts of the world, the internet connection is bad. And if you don't have a good internet connection, you're pretty much doomed on a remote team, because it's just all pain all the time. So the baseline of great remote teams is great internet. So I always tell people, if there's anything you can spend your money on, it's internet. And then the next thing would be, sound quality, but also I'm going to say great equipment. But you know, the barking dog and the coffee shop and calling in from the car, it really gets in the way of a good communication. And I had a colleague once who had a bird cage next to her station, and it's really cute at first, and 20 minutes into the call, you're done with the bird. So you really have to pay attention to this. So having a good headset can be good. Noise-canceling headsets are really inexpensive these days. And I just learned about an app just a couple of days ago that actually takes out the background sound without having to use any sort of special microphone. So this is crisp.ai, and it works with most of the video conferencing tools, and it just takes out background sound for you. Haven't tried it yet, but I'm hearing really good things about it. It's on my list. I'll be doing it this week. And then the other thing is, after good internet, is we want to use good equipment. You want to toss the spider phone. You got to get Skype for Business out of the office, and maybe do something more ecological than throwing it into a lake, of course. But we really need to get good equipment. And I'll show you a couple of examples now, and I'll show you a lot more examples in a bit. So one of the first thing is our conference room equipment. We can do a lot better. There's Logitech now, has some great stuff. We can get rid of the spider phones. Meeting Owl is a new one that's come out this year. It's a 360-degree microphone and camera that focuses on the person that's talking automatically. So if you have hybrid teams, some people in the office and some people remote, this can be a really great one. And then, of course, we can set up our conference rooms to be more modern, where we can have the remote attendees on a bigger screen and show a screen for screen sharing so that everybody can be involved. I mean, this is a much better setup than the old conference room. So essentially, we want to go from this, which was the old style, to something more like this, which is info presence, what they're calling it. And as you can see, it simulates what it's like to sit across the table from each other, and that's pretty important. And with all of this, you're noticing that people have their videos on. And that's another part of a successful remote team. I know it's not applicable in every situation, but turning the video on goes a long way in terms of team building, camaraderie, empathy on remote teams. Just being able to see each other can do a lot. Now, Time magazine, as you'll notice, has printed almost every cover a picture of a person on their cover, and they do that for a very specific reason. It's because we're way more engaged and way more interested when we see somebody else. So you can see how powerful video really is on remote teams. And this brings us to our next poll question. Many people don't like to turn their video on, and I have to activate the poll before you're going to be able to read it, but many people don't like to turn their videos on, and these are the various reasons why. So let me go back and turn this one on. And we'll go to full screen, and we'll say, why don't you turn your video on? Hopefully, in this audience, it seems like a more sophisticated audience than usual, and people do use video. So great, I'm already happy to see some of the results. Interesting. Usually multitasking comes out first. And it's totally anonymous. I'm not collecting your data, so feel free to be honest. That's true. No option. So there's no other. Yeah, there's a few. I'm not going to capture everybody's reasons. Bad internet is a good reason. But with video, one of the things that we can do if there is bad internet is you can turn your video on for the first 5 minutes of the conversation just to say hello, and then turn it off to continue it, and then at the end to say goodbye, turn it on again. Even that goes a long way in terms of building team spirit. Okay, so most of the audience does use video, and I'm really happy to hear that. The future is video, and in fact, the future is a lot more than video, and we'll get to that in a second. And online meetings tend to be really terrible, and the reason is because mostly people are multitasking, and we can see that we're not turning the video on because we don't want people to know that we're multitasking. But is there anybody in the audience who's ever watched a webinar without multitasking? Right? It doesn't happen. So it's important to turn our videos on just to engage in the camaraderie. So for people that are shy, I know it can be uncomfortable. I never force any of my teams to use video, but I turn mine on no matter what. The extroverts on the team will turn theirs on immediately because they love it, and slowly people will also turn theirs on. And maybe there's one person who never does, but still there's progress. And if you're in your casual clothes, I say, we can remote working in your pajamas is sort of the thing that people think of, but put on a business shirt and stay in your pajama bottoms is totally fine. So, we have to be professional when we go online. Okay. Okay. So those are sort of the very basics about how to make communicating easy. Fast internet, great equipment, and pay attention to the sound quality. There's a bunch of other things that play into that, but that's sort of the very basics. And then the next part of being successful is defining what normal behavior is on your team, defining the expectations. And the way that I do this is with my teams, I create a team agreement. And that just sort of outlines the ways of working together. Are there core hours that we need to be together online? Where is the information that we need to share? How are we going to communicate together? And how do we know what each other are doing? And putting this sort of team agreement in place will take away a lot of the basic misunderstandings that we have on remote teams. And don't worry, there will be plenty others to deal with, but it's good to just get the easy stuff out of the way. So I interviewed Beat Buhlmann, who is the head of EMEA for Evernote, and they have what they define their etiquettes for a remote team, which is just their behaviors. And they have etiquette for meetings, how they behave in meetings, how they behave with sending emails, how they set up their home offices. So all of this they have outlined in their own team agreements, which is pretty powerful. And it just helps the team to align, and it sets expectations. So I had a colleague once who used she used email like an instant message system. So you just get like one email after another with one random thought and like 20 emails at once. And it's fine, it's easy enough to solve, right? You just delete everything. But over time, it makes it so that you want to reach out to her less. And on a remote team, that is death. We want to be able to proactively reach out to our colleagues as much as possible. So good to define the etiquette and the tools that you're going to be using together. The other thing that you want to define in a team agreement is how you're going to give each other feedback. And in a lot of companies, it's usually the annual performance review. And on remote teams or on Agile teams, hopefully you're doing regular retrospectives. But this is sort of an area that gets left, that just sort of gets swept under the carpet. And with remote teams, there's all kinds of little things that come up, and they're almost saying something about it is almost too big of a deal. It makes it into more of a deal, but you need to find ways of blowing steam every once in a while. So groups have created Slack channels, like the Happy Melly team, we have a virtual pillow fight channel, and the rule there is we don't have to be politically correct. You can just say, Ralph, I'm annoyed at you, and for this reason, and it's just understood that it's just a way to blow steam. If it starts to get emotional, we quickly go e-face to e-face and talk about it on video, but if you just need to get something off your chest, you need to find ways of doing that. And of course, we can't forget about one-on-ones with each other, and Jürgen Appelo has come up with a 360-degree peer-to-peer feedback system, which is always really interesting. Whatever it is that you put into place, whatever works for your team, but there needs to be something that we put into place about how to give each other feedback. The other aspect of that is appreciation. How do we show appreciation on remote teams? I have to say that when we show appreciation, it can really boost morale, but when we don't show appreciation, it can decrease morale. So this is one of those situations where if we do nothing, there's a negative effect. And so that's why it's really important. And with appreciation on remote teams, we can get creative. You can send a pizza almost anywhere in the world. So if you notice that your team's working late, send them a pizza, because it's always good for breakfast, even if they don't need it for dinner. There are also beer of the month clubs or wine of the month clubs, or all kinds of things that you can send. There's all kinds of apps now where you can send people experiences. So they can go to the app and choose, do I want a bungee jump, or do I want to have a chocolate tasting or a wine tasting experience? So it's one of those things with remote teams is now we can get a little bit creative in what we do. Okay, so that's defining normal behavior, but now I want to talk about creating presence, because this is where it gets pretty fun and pretty exciting. So by creating presence, I mean, how do we work out loud? How do we know what each other are doing on a remote team? How do we make it observable to others? Now, the obvious one, of course, is daily stand-ups. I think everybody here knows what those are. Oops, and my slides are not, or I'm behind. Daily stand-ups. So we want to be able to hold daily stand-ups. That is one way of creating presence and letting each other know what we're doing on a team. The other one is all kinds of tasks list. I've done this as one of my favorites, but I mean, for every tool I show you, there's 100 competitors. So, and I don't get paid for any of the tools that I'm showing. I'm just a slavish fan. So I've done this as a Facebook-style news feed where you can just list what you're doing. People can comment on it. They can like on it. It's just a way of having a conversation about it. And then we'll start to get a little bit more far out. Some teams are installing webcams. So this is a team in Germany. So they have one team. It's called a TEO board. It stands for Ein Team, Ein Office. So one team, one office. And they have a team in another city of Germany, or they're in two cities. So there's two teams. And they've got a webcam connecting each other where the sound and the video is on all day. So they can hear each other, and they're essentially working as one team in two different offices. So that's one. There's another team that set up a webcam where they have the sound off and the video on, and it's just a webcam so that they can see to each other's offices. And what they've ended up doing is developing a cool sign language. So they have like a special hand signal for good morning and a special signal for going to lunch. So just being able to see each other creates some sort of a camaraderie. This is one of my all-time favorite tools for creating presence. It's called Sococo. It's a virtual office, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's an office that you go to online. Each one of those squares represents a room, and each one of those dots is an avatar of a person in that room. Now, you can only see and hear the people that are in the same room with you, but you're just a double click away of going into another room and seeing what people are doing there. So you no longer have to say, like, okay, as a team, can everybody get together next Wednesday at 2? Okay, not 2. Okay, 4:30? So those days are over. You can simply knock on your virtual door of your colleagues and go talk to them right away. So it's a great way of meeting together and seeing where everybody else is on the virtual floor plan. So this is a nice 2D version. And for those that know me, know that I'm really into the telepresence robots, and I have one here today. It's a really old version, so it doesn't actually work anymore, but I can at least show you what it does. This is the Kubi. So essentially you beam in just like you're on Skype, except for now you can move yourself from side to side, and you can shake your head yes and no. And so basically you can sit, if you're the only remote employee in a room full of in-person people, you can sit at the table with them and turn yourself to see who's talking. And when you beam in, you actually feel the person talking either to the left or to the right. You can feel if somebody's behind you. It's very odd, actually. And for the people that are in the flesh, this small amount of movement humanizes the remote person a little bit. The movement really starts to matter, and even just something as simple as this. So this is the telepresence robot. And Facebook just announced that they're releasing Facebook Portal. Exact same concept as the Kubi, except the camera moves, but the screen stays in the same place. So you're sort of losing that ability to move yourself, but the camera moves and follows the person with them. So also another really great, depends on what you're looking for. Now, Suitable Technologies has made the drivable version of the Kubi. So you've probably seen this on the Big Bang Theory or at several conferences where you beam in and it's person height and you drive yourself using the arrow keys on your keyboard. So it's a problem if your office has a lot of stairs or elevators, of course, or a swimming pool is also not very handy. But you can now beam in, drive yourself around, and at the Suitable Technologies office, 50% of their people are there in the flesh, and 50% of the people are there via robot. And they interact this way every day. And if you're wondering how you say hello or shake, you can't shake hands with people and robots, of course. Instead, we do something a little more 2D, and that is we fist bump. So that's if you're saying hi to people and robots, you can always fist bump. So I'll take a couple steps out there. Virtual reality is starting to become a thing when internet connections become a lot more fast. Roomy is one of the great tools. It's virtual reality for remote teams. So you put on your headset, you walk into your virtual office, literally, you walk down the hallway, go to the conference room that you need to be in, and stand around your virtual whiteboard with your remote colleagues in a virtual world. So, I mean, most of us are still struggling with Skype for Business and Spider phones, so this is a long way off, but you can at least see the direction that we're headed in, and it's starting to become easier and easier. I mean, I'm pretty tech savvy. I'm not a programmer by any means, but I'm pretty tech savvy, and when I got dropped off into Second Life, I found it really hard to move the avatar body around. I mean, it wasn't so easy, but with Roomy, virtual reality is getting a lot more easy. And then one of my all-time favorites is holograms. And holograms are right around the corner. And in fact, they've been around for a long time, but it's just too complicated right now to get a good hologram. But I want to show you an example of a hologram that I thought was just one of the coolest uses of the technology I've ever seen. And I'm going to show a video of Tupac, the rapper, on stage with Snoop Dogg in 2012 at Coachella. And I'm going to play about a minute and a half, and Tupac is there as a hologram, and Snoop Dogg is there in the flesh. And so I'll warn you in advance that it's gangster rap, and the language is pretty over the top. So I apologize, but it really is the coolest video that I could find. They had some other ones of like Roy Orbison, but it just looks kind of ghosty, and this one really looks real. And I challenge you, unless you really know Tupac and Snoop Dogg, I challenge you to see if you would guess that it was a hologram or not. So let me start it up. Oh, my mouse is in a weird screen. Hold on. Here we go. Okay, this is Tupac. He's the hologram.
Gangsta shit.
Yeah, that's what the fuck I'm talking about.
Hey, yo, Pop, let these motherfuckers know what kind of party they in right now.
Ain't nothing but a gangsta party.
Oh, shit. Come on, y'all.
You done put two of America's most wanted in the same motherfucking place at the same motherfucking time. Gangsta party. Y'all niggas about to feel this. Break out the champagne glasses and motherfucking condoms. Have one on us.
Kick that shit, nephew.
Picture perfect. I paint a perfect picture. Bomber hoochies with precision. My intentions to get with you with that and double OP. Dog, my fucking homie. Use a cold ass nigga on the mall.
Show enough, I keep my hand on my gun, cause they got me on the run. Now I'm back in the cold room, working on the outcome. Put two pockets on the soda niggas.
So you get the idea, but a pretty cool use of hologram technology. And I think when it becomes more viable for people, it's going to change the nature of how we work together remotely. If you can beam into a conference and have somebody here on stage as a 3D hologram that looks as good as Tupac, maybe not as ripped. We don't all have to have the six-pack or anything, but I'd love to. But it will really change the nature of the game, I think. So that's pretty cool. Now, in the not gangster rap world, holograms right now and telepresence are all being used in the medical profession. That's sort of where the technology is originating from and going, and lots of motivation to use it there. And this is a doctor that's beaming into somebody's home to give them medical care at home. So you can see where things are going. Okay, so if you want to learn more about the tools, I've got on my website a page for tools. There's like 400 tools listed there, and they're all categorized. But what I'd like to say is it's not about the tool, of course, but the tool does facilitate certain behaviors, and that's why the tools become important. You can use almost anything except Skype for Business, and you can work remotely pretty well. But you do have to find the right tools. And so it's good to experiment and to try new things out, and there's a new one being developed every day. But it is good to facilitate behavior. But now to bring it back down to earth a little bit, I mean, we don't need to have fancy holograms in order to create presence on Teams. You can do something as simple as putting up a photo wall in each of the various offices and just hanging pictures of your colleagues on the wall so you know which Frederick it is or which Jan it is, right? So it's good to do that. And just last week, one of my workshop attendees wrote to me and said that somebody on their photo wall put up a total badass photo of themselves, and the whole team came to look at the photo wall just to check out this one guy's photo, which got me thinking that it doesn't have to remain a static photo wall, that you could change it based on event or occasion. So you could have something for the holidays or something for any holiday or a theme for different months. So you could, I mean, even with something as simple as a photo wall, we can go a long way with creating presence and team building on virtual teams. Other things that I really recommend, and lots of people are doing, this is virtual lunch. So this is my colleagues Gretchen and Laura, and they're simply every Wednesday used to get together and have virtual lunch together. So the only rule was no talking about work, and you just get together and hang out. And that's something that, of course, on remote teams is very difficult to do because we usually get into our meeting, have the meeting, go through the agenda, and then get out. And there's no time for, hey, how was your weekend? And, you know, what are you having for lunch today? And that kind of thing. So this is just one way of doing that. Okay, because I always get asked about time zones, I added a slide in about time zones. And the truth of the matter is we can't physically squeeze the world together to to change time zones. And it is true that the further out you go, the more difficult it becomes. Working with people in Australia is really difficult because of the time zones. So, 11, 12 hours apart and you're doomed. So a few of the tips that are recommended, and you can get more tips on the website, but one is really organize your teams well. So you don't necessarily have to have the teams working together. It's okay for different offices to be working on their own projects and then checking in, or you could try a follow the sun approach. Many other things, but the thing is you have to be really intentional about time zones because there's nothing you can physically do to squeeze the world closer together. So it is possible. Maximizing the overlap time, of course, on the teams. Recording your meetings. So the meetings that you have with one team during the day, sending the recording to the team when they wake up so they can at least see the nature of the conversation, or have two different Scrum Masters that are have two meetings with two Scrum Masters that they're in both meetings so that there's some overlap. All kinds of ways to be creative about time zones. And it's always going to remain a difficult challenge, unfortunately. Okay, so there is no one right way to make remote teams work. I think that's sort of what I'd like you to take away from this. It is a series of trying lots of little things. And fortunately, it's not rocket science. It's just a matter of doing it. So I think you've all come because you wanted to know how successful remote Agile teams are making it work. And I really think the keys are make your communicating easy, define what normal behavior is on your team, and create presence. However presence looks to you, create presence on your team and be deliberate about it. And the last thing that I'll end with is get training for your team. And yes, it's a sort of a shameless self-promotion. I have a workshop, but Judy Rees, who is here today, she also has a workshop. Pilar Orti runs a company called Virtual Not Distance. She also has a workshop. People think that, oh, remote working is really easy, but actually there's a whole bunch of nuances to it, and you can't take how we work in person and translate it directly to online. It's good to get some training. So if your team is really struggling, definitely consider some training. And the last thing I'd like to do is I'll end with the last poll, which is after today, after hearing and seeing what's available on the market, how will you enhance your virtual team experience? So let me go ahead and start the poll. And I'll show the results so we can at least see where people are in terms of what they're going to do. So will you upgrade your internet connection or create a team agreement, start using video? Interesting. How many people here have some sort of team agreement on their team right now? Okay, that's like 10%. I promise it will go a long way by creating. The discussions that you have while creating a team agreement are really valuable. So interesting to see what people have. Using video, better equipment, trying virtual offices or telepresence, working out loud. And yeah, if we're in Sweden, you don't really need to upgrade the internet connection here. It's probably one of the best in the world, right? So, but it's other teams that will have to do that. So I hope that you've taken something away today from this talk, and I'll be around for the rest of the week if people have questions. But I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.